teaching with purpose and beginning with the end in mind. When you sort of think about teaching with purpose, all sorts of ideas of beliefs and ideas about what an education ought to instill in us and our children come to mind. Because naturally, as parents, we are teachers. We are the first teachers of our children. So these thoughts come to us, and whatever our beliefs are, whatever we think about education and what it ought to instill, naturally gets applied to the teaching methods that we use and the approaches that we use within our teaching. So for me, education is actually a lifelong journey. Just like our Prophet ﷺ has advised us to seek knowledge from the cradle to the grave. And I like the word journey because journey sort of evokes the sense of like, you're not wandering. A wandering is more like an aimless, you don't have a sense of direction. It's sort of aimless. You're not lost, but you're sort of aimless. Whereas journey, there's an awareness of your destination, and it's a purposeful direction that you're heading. And then again, when you think of journey, you're sort of thinking about the epitome of journeys that we undertake in this world, in this dunya, and that is the Hajj. And that in itself also means to take a journey, to embark on a journey, right? And it's a journey towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it's interesting because our Prophet ﷺ said that Hajj or Arafah is Hajj. And that's really interesting to me because it has, Arafah is related to the word Ma'rifah, which is to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the Hajj is a journey, a reminder for us to come to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So then Arafah becomes the land of Ma'rifah, where we sort of kind of realize that our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who He is and who we are the Abd. So I sort of like that comparison and taking on that journey that throughout life, that education is that journey as well, that we can see reflected in the Hajj. And with that being said, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also asks us a very important question in Surah Al-Takwir at the end. And He said, فَأَيْنَ تَذْهَبُونَ? Where then are you going? Where are you going? Right? So this elicits a sense of that you must know where you're going. You have to begin with the end in mind. So as with any journey, you have to know where you are. You have to know where you're beginning from, where you are, where you want to go, and then how you're going to get there, right? So inshallah, brings us to the overview of tonight, where we will begin with the end in mind. We'll start to figure out, orient ourselves where we are, where we want to go, and how to get there. And how to get there, part of that is teaching with purpose. And then I'll introduce an Islamic framework of teaching, and then we'll have a summary, and then we'll have some Q&A, inshallah. So, beginning with the end in mind, before we can even get to the topic, Muslim scholars, theologians, and jurists have a saying among themselves is that let there not be any disputing about terminology. Because anytime you embark on a new study, you want to make sure you got the vocabulary right, that you're on the same page, and that everybody's on the same page, and there's no misunderstanding. So in order to do that, I wanted to actually look at the statement, teaching with purpose. What does really teaching mean? And what is our purpose, right? And then some other terminologies that we're going to come across are worldview, philosophy of education, and pedagogy. Don't get worked up about it, inshallah. As we go through, we will define them so that we're on the same page, inshallah. And if you are not familiar or it's still unfamiliar to you, please feel free to ask to clarify, inshallah. So that's where I wanted to begin. Beginning with the right question. Right? Because oftentimes when we think about education, we always ask, what shall I teach and how shall I teach it? And actually the answer to that begins with a more fundamental question than that. And that is, what is the nature of the human being? Who are we? And what is our purpose here? And you might be wondering, what does our purpose have to do with education? And then that leads to another question. What is the purpose of education? Right? So let's begin there. What is education? When you were to look it up on the internet, or if you were to look it up into the dictionary, it offers sort of these three definitions of them, and I'll read them out to you. So education, the act or process of educating or being educated. Two, the act or process of providing a person with the knowledge, the skill, the competence, or usually desirable qualities of behavior or character by a formal instruction, course of study, instruction, or training. And last, the third one, a conditioning, strengthening, or disciplining of the mind or faculties. But that, even although the dictionary does point to an answer, it doesn't really tell us what kind of knowledge, what kind of skill, what kind of behavior or competence that is desirable for our children. So is that exact idea or consideration of what kind is what a philosophy of education covers. So you're looking at, so that brings up what is a philosophy of education. So that what kindness, asking that question is what is rooted within the philosophy. That's what it deals with. So each individual has a set of beliefs or personal belief or philosophy, a lens with which to look at the world from. That's a worldview. And it is an attitude towards life, children, parenting, politics, all of that. And usually what shapes your worldview? Usually it's your religion, your faith, how you have been taught, how you've been educated, your teachers, your suhbah, your community, your family, your friends, even social media and society influences that worldview, even if you're unknowingly allowing it to. So a philosophy of education then looks at the lens with which you use to look at education. So you answer questions, so it's the aims and objectives of education. Basically, it's purpose. So then it asks questions like, what is the meaning and what is the purpose of education, right? Why do we educate someone and how do we educate them? And then is there a difference between education of an individual and for society? Does that make a difference if we educate them or not? So these are the types of questions that you look at for a philosophy of education. These are the types of questions that you will answer, inshallah. And what's interesting is that most of us have a philosophy of education. We kind of answer these questions without us really realizing it, right? So far so good? Are we good with everything? Okay, so that brings us right back to the first question. What is the nature of the human being? Because no educational philosophy can be consistent or valid unless it is underpinned by a just and comprehensive view of the human being. How we answer this question is dependent upon our worldview. So does a worldview really matter? Does it really matter? Should we begin with the end in mind? Let's consider another question. Does our charter, our state, and our country have a philosophy of education? Essentially, what am I asking is, are they considering the what kind of knowledge, what kind of skill, what kind of competence, what kind of desirable qualities of behavior are needed in our children? And are they devising and implementing teaching methods and approaches to carry out, to fulfill those kinds of knowledge, skills, and desirable qualities? What do you think? Yeah, they do, right? They do have a philosophy of education. Because why? Education is the reproductive system of society. And I want to say that again. This is by Ibn Khaldun, and he mentioned this, that education is the reproductive system of a society. That statement is really scary, but also very hopeful at the same time, because the education system determines what kind of person will be created. So as a teacher or as a parent, we need to know what kind of education our child is receiving. So that brings us to the next part, orienting ourselves, knowing where we are. The purpose, what's the purpose of schooling in America, right? What does that look like? Well, the original three purposes of schooling in America were to make good people, to make good citizens, and to make each person his or her best. Then over the course of the 20th century, when the Industrial Revolution happened, things started to change. So the third purpose of education, to make each person his or her best, they started to define that a little bit more. What does that really mean, to make each and his or her person the best? It means that children were then looked upon as human resources. Now you know why you have your HR departments, right? So, because it is doing the most good for political, social, and economic efficiencies, right? So, the philosophies of education that are used across our state and mostly across the country are usually biased towards a pragmatic or a practical approach. It means that it is unattractive and it's usually test-based and it's all about results. So it's very much textbook oriented and very much just testing the students for efficiency. So the aim is really not the development of the child. Rather, the aim is what benefits the state, because that's the output. That's the end game. So it is the material perfection of the human being, the pursuit of pleasure, or as they would say in their philosophical terms, hedonism, which is the pursuit of pleasure. So children naturally become more concerned about getting rich fast, about their social media accounts, about pop culture and celebrity culture, and even about their physical appearances, right? And this shouldn't be surprising because we're using the same teaching strategies as the state and expecting different results. And so a child expressing those kinds of behaviors shouldn't be surprising because that's what they have been taught. And we haven't done anything to change that. So our children haven't been educated out of that. So remember that an education system determines the child that comes out, what kind of person is created. So if you are still using the same methods and practices, it's not surprising that they end up with the same values of what the philosophy entailed, which was to pursue this dunya, right? Alhamdulillah. So it's not merely a difference of curriculum or teaching methods. It is actually a difference of purpose, going back to the beginning, or what is the end result that you want. So I wanted to read you something from John Taylor Gatto, and John Taylor Gatto actually has done he's an American writer and author, and he wrote a lot, and he was actually a teacher as well, and won Teacher of the Year award in 1990 as well. This is a quote from one of his essays, but he's most known for the Underground History of America, American Education, and Dumbing Us Down. And so he wrote, theorists from Plato to Rousseau knew well and explicitly taught that if children could be kept childish beyond the natural term, if they could be cloistered in a society of children, if they could be stripped of responsibility, if their inner lives could be starved by removing the insights of historians, philosophers, economists, novelists, and religious figures, if the inevitability of suffering and death could be removed from daily consciousness and replaced with trivializing emotions of greed, envy, jealousy, and fear, then young people would grow older, but they would never grow up. So for who could argue against the truth? The childish and childlike people are far easier to manage than accomplished thinkers. It's pretty, subhanAllah. So it is a flawed view. It really is a flawed view or an incomplete view of the human being or of man. And that will result in a flawed philosophy, and in the case of education, in flawed teaching methods that do not address the real needs of learners. So before we get here, I had actually read something recently that Sheikh Hamza wrote in a recent publication in his magazine, and he actually mentioned Rousseau. And Rousseau is actually, his theories about education is really really heavily influenced modern theories of education right now. And all of you are probably familiar with child-centered learning. So that came from Jean-Jacques Rousseau. And also this idea of giving credence or credit to feelings. So Sheikh Hamza Yusuf said something really interesting about him. He said, what's interesting about Rousseau is that he wrote these treatises on education and how to raise a child, yet he abandoned all 5 of his children and they ended up in terrible conditions in France. None of their theories are rooted in revelation or reason. So as Muslims, we have become susceptible to these kinds of ideas because we have lost our own grounding of education within our own tradition. So we're adopting these ideas unknowingly without realizing what philosophy, what worldview they're coming from. And we are unknowing of it because we have lost our own way as well. So coming back to that very first question, what is the nature of the human being from an Islamic worldview? Knowing where we are. So we're going to come back and reorient ourselves to where we need to be or where we are. The nature of the human being. The human being is actually a spiritual being. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala perfected the body of Adam alayhi salatu salam, and then he blew his ruh into him. And then he taught him the names of things. Ibn Khaldun, who I mentioned, said that education is the reproductive system of society, was a 14th century thinker. And he wrote like a 7-volume works called Kitab al-Idbar, the Book of Lessons. And book 1, the Muqaddimah, is an introduction to that book. And Ibn Khaldun also is known as the father of sociology. So he wrote that it should be known that God distinguished man from all other animals by an ability to think, which he made the beginning of human perfection and the end of man's noble superiority over existing things. So within an Islamic education, the perfect human being is blessed with the fact that the human being is composed of a theoretical mind and a practical intellect, practical intellect and a theoretical intellect. So there's 2 components here, and you'll notice that when we're coming down, and one sometimes is missed from the other. So intellect, when you look at the word intellect, the Arabic word is aql. It means to tie down, to restrain you, to hold you down. It is your better mind. It actually means to prevent you from doing the stupid. That's what your intellect does. That's what you have a mind for. Alhamdulillah. So our purpose then becomes, at the root of Islamic teaching is the conviction of purpose, right? The Muslim teacher believes that learning began with Prophet Adam alayhi salatu wasalam. And because he was the first human to receive teaching directly from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And as a result of these teachings, humans were granted a privileged position on the earth as a khulafa. That's the amana that we were granted, right? To live and teach according to Allah's ordinances. So every legally responsible person from the past, present, and future is individually responsible. A human being's primal purpose then is to become Allah's Khalifa by actualizing his or her servitude, that you're an abd of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, becoming agents of mercy, peace, and development. So now that we have oriented ourselves, now we can move on to the next step. Where are we going, right? And that comes with knowing the purpose of education. So, and education is the means of instilling Islam in the learners. Its aim is the aim of the deen and the religion, and the commands of the revelation aim to perfect the highest part of physical creation, humanity. That is the aim and ultimate goal, to allow humanity to return and ascend to Allah. So education thus aims to perfect the human being, bringing about their latent faculties. Your theoretical mind and your practical mind will come together with all of that, which ultimately leads to knowing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It is Tawhid-centric. It is to know Allah. So education is a remembering, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had asked us before this, Alastu bi rabbikum, am I not your Lord? And we replied in the affirmative, Bala shahidna, indeed you are, and we testify to this, you are our Lord. This is when we were in our fitri stage. So learning within the Islamic tradition is remembering. It is remembering that sacred covenant that we made, of remembering, am I not your Lord? So this world is a place of remembrance and a place of recollection, because you can't recall what you didn't know, right? So it is not hedonism, it is not the pursuit of pleasure, or nihilism, which is life is meaningless, right? And then you add value to it. The purpose of education in the highest form of knowledge is to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Education is also adab, right? Because Sayyid Muhammad Naqib al-Attas, he mentions that the fundamental element inherent in the concept of education in Islam is the inculcation of adab. For it is adab that instills the quality of goodness that is sought after. So, what does it mean to give adab to someone? It means adab is that placing something in its rightful place, giving someone their due, knowing our world in the universe, and knowing Allah's place in all of it, right? So this is what we're talking about when we're going to bring them all together and to see that this education is also adab. And we cannot really talk about adab without actually mentioning the word tarbiyah. Do you guys know what tarbiyah is? So when you talk about tarbiyah is to take someone and develop them from step by step by step, right? And so this is why education has two parts. There is the ta'aleem component, which is to give knowledge, and that relates to what Ibn Khaldun mentioned as your theoretical mind. It is knowing, it is teaching, and you're a mu'allim. As a teacher, you become the giver of knowledge. But tarbiyah is also, and oftentimes we only focus on the ta'aleem part of it, which is the curriculum, the textbook, and the what of the education. But we forget about this development part, which is the other wing. So we're literally giving our children one wing, not both wings to ascend. So tarbiyah is that component where you are removing vices and instilling good traits so that you're helping that person reach perfection. And when you talk about perfection, it's not really perfection in the sense of like, oh, we don't have blemishes. It is perfection in the sense that you're making that person become their personal best, which is what? Not human resources. That's not our personal best. So this is a different kind of personal best. So within an Islamic worldview of an education, the intellectual and the moral development are consistently linked. And it is where character and intellectual virtue are the aim. So as teachers, when you're teaching with purpose, you are both a mu'allim and a murabbi, a nurturer of souls. So because Al-Razi said that the perfection of these two faculties enables a person to resemble an angel. And this is what happens when you can take away the vices and you use that knowledge and you make it, because when you know, you do. Just like when you had Iman, you have to acknowledge Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through your mind that I believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then what becomes fard upon you immediately? You know and you do your salah. There's not even a blip between it. Soon as you say your shahada, salah is mandatory right upon you, right? So this is what it is. So then it requires a paradigm shift. We have to change our perspective about what education is and what the purpose is. So recasting our discussion of the purpose of education, we might say that education should create a worldview for children that will make sense of the world and give them a standard of conduct by which they desire to live by. A philosophy instructs, but the deen instructs and enables. So the last component is one of the biggest one, knowing how to get there. How are we going to reach that Tawhid-centric idea of knowing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? It is through our teaching. Because in order to realize the Tawheed of Allah, the Tawheed of Allah is meaning that Allah is one, yes, but it's also realizing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is doing everything at every moment. And that means that our teaching has to be Tawhid-centric, because our method or our approach is that unifier. How we teach your role as a murabbi, you taking that role on, is what unifies the head and the heart, the secular and the sacred, the religious and the academic. Because it's really a fatal mistake to separate those out, right? And you as a teacher, teaching with purpose means that you fuse them together. And then you give your kids or your children both wings, inshallah. But that requires a framework from which to do. And that framework is rooted within but rooted, or its target is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when you're looking at a framework of teaching, it's not just the textbook and what's in front of you. It's you're looking at the state of the child. What's the state of the child in your classroom? They're in a state of fitrah. And so your job as a murabbi, as a parent or as a teacher, is to preserve that fitrah, right? And the fitrah means recalling who Allah is. And as a murabbi, you have to nurture that. The other thing that you have to think about is, why are you teaching, right? Because the highest form of knowledge is to remember Allah. Then what are you teaching? Whether it's biology, math, science, history, it doesn't matter what you're teaching, you're going to root that within a pedagogy. And a pedagogy is basically how you teach. What approaches are you using? And so who do you look at when you're going to look to teach? Or who are you going to model? Our Prophet ﷺ, because he was sent as a teacher. But that's a whole other topic when you look at the way the Prophet ﷺ taught and how he interacted with his students. So how you're teaching also has to be very much remembering that you are a murabbi, that you are a nurturer of souls, and allow a child to ask questions. Some children might say, today I don't want to recite Qur'an. Today I don't want to do this or that. Are you supposed to shun them and say that you can't say that? No, you have to look at them and say, what's going on? Sometimes children just say things because there's something else going on underneath. So your job as a murabbi, they're just saying that because perhaps they can't focus. Maybe they missed breakfast. Maybe they didn't have enough sleep. Perhaps a grandparent came to live with them, and they're just being visceral, right? So your job as a murabbi is to say, hey, what's going on here, right? So that's where this is where that unifier happens. And then when a child can see that Islam being beautiful within you, then they also will accept it, inshallah. And they will realize that the deen is beautiful as well. So it takes a lot. It's a very active role being a murabbi, but it is a beautiful role, inshallah. And then, so when we look at this, I wanted to put all of it together. And that's where we said that you begin with the end in mind. Your purpose is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And your pedagogy, that's where the tarbiyah happens. The moral education of children happen. That's how they learn to be Muslim, from you. And then the last thing, the state of the teacher, the state of the child, and then what you're teaching, that's how you draw the circle close, where you bring peace, inshallah. So teaching with purpose requires us to root our ideas or our values or our beliefs about education within an Islamic framework. And so an Islamic framework is encompassing all of these elements. So it's not just a textbook oriented sort of do this work and let's move on, and efficiency, right? And what I wanted to get at is also that when you look at schooling or the idea of schooling, there are three overarching sort of categories that you look at when you are developing a school. There's the school administration, there is the curriculum, and there's also the instructional approaches that you're going to use. The first two, school administration and curriculum, are usually the ones that are looked at the most. But the instructional approaches, that's where the purpose happens, is actually generally left out. And much work needs to be done. Because most school administration utilize policies and procedures that establish an environment that's going to be Islamic. Curriculum, we've Islamicized some curriculum and taken out, and we've been very conscientious of that, or people have developed our curriculum from the ground up, inculcating that tarbiyah in it. But instructional approaches, that one has been relatively untouched, and it's really sad because I would argue that it is the unifier of everything. And so we need some work there, inshallah, because as you saw, that the common sort of understanding or acceptable thing is that, you know what, we're not gonna take the state mandated curriculum, but the state mandated instructions of how to teach, we're gonna accept that. But as we saw, that those state mandated approaches to education, it drives a certain philosophy, it drives a certain end. And that's not the end we want for our children, right? Which is to be removed from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, be removed from the deen. It is why you are choosing to either send your children to an Islamic school, or you choose to homeschool, or you choose to do a co-op, or you advise your children when they come home to sort of, I guess, what do you say, undo what has happened at school. So that's the whole reason why you're doing it. You don't want that end for your child, inshallah. So teaching in all cases, or in all sense of the world, implies a certain worldview. So even within your own self, you have to make sure that your worldview is also the correct one. It's the right one because your teaching will be naturally impacted by how you view the world and what you see as the deen. So learning your fard ayn, learning your aqidah, it's a process that all of you, it's a lifelong journey that all of you have to undertake, inshallah, together. So what I really wanted to get home is that our worldview matters. How we view education, that's what drives our purpose. What is our own beliefs about it? That's what drives us. So if, as educators, as parents, and as school administrators or principal or whomever, board members, if we are not the one that's taking our eyes off of our textbooks on our worksheets, and we're just concerned about the day-to-day check marks, right? And we're not lifting our eyes up and looking to the horizon in terms of looking to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who is doing it for us? Who is doing it for us, right? So this is why I was very happy when I read Zaytech Academy's, their vision and what they have looked, casting their eyes up, inshallah. And it says that the purpose of education at Zaytech Academy is to aid students in pursuing and discovering beauty, truth, and goodness. Because the purpose of education is to produce a good human being. And a good human being for me means what the Prophet ﷺ told us that will weigh the heaviest on Yawm al-Qiyamah. Taqwa and husnul khuluq. You have to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you have to have beautiful character. Those are the two heaviest things on your scale. And that is exactly what an Islamic education addresses. And that is teaching with purpose. When you have both the murabbi and the ma'alim coming together, so that you have both wings, inshallah ta'ala. And bringing it all together now. So teaching with purpose means providing an education that gives our children the opportunity to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala correctly. It is for them to live their lives in a state of good physical, mental, and spiritual health or well-being. This is what distinguishes us as human beings from the rest of the animals. It's our ability to think and comprehend what we have learned. Because giving our children the ability to assess what they have acquired, if it's true or not, if it's beneficial or not, even that we have to acknowledge. Rabbi zidni ilma. Oh, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us knowledge that's beneficial, because certain knowledge can also harm. So you also see all this duality and things, that Allah subhanahu, there's good and bad. So giving them the ability to do that, to assess what is beneficial or not, and then folding that into their hearts so that they believe it, and that they have the right view of the world. Because once you believe something, then they will act accordingly. And inshallah, they'll act accordingly to what the Prophet ﷺ brought and what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is most pleased with. Because when you know, you do, right? And I wanted to leave you with one of my most favorite ones, and I read this to my children often. It's a hadith Qudsi, and it's addressed to the young person. And it said, the Prophet ﷺ said that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, truly, God Most High boasts to his angels about a young person who has devoted himself to God's worship and service, saying, O young person, who has given up your desires and sacrificed this time of health and strength for my sake, to me, you are like one of my angels. Inshallah, it is our hope that we give both of our children their wings. Inshallah. Jazakumullah khair. So
You mentioned about the first thing, administration, and then you mentioned curriculum. I 100% agree with you. So the third thing to mention is the instructional procedures. So can you briefly, very briefly, I know we're short on time, highlight what would you recommend as far as the instructional approaches are concerned?
Well, there are principles of teaching that have been, I guess, from, as Brother Khalid mentioned in my biography, I was fortunate, alhamdulillah, to attend an Islamic teacher's educational program. There's lots of work that still needs to be done about how the Prophet ﷺ taught. And so what they did is that the teacher, they're creating principles for teaching or of teaching based upon how the Prophet ﷺ taught and what is in our sacred, in the Qur'an as well, but mostly from the life of the Prophet ﷺ. So if I go off the bat of my head, there were 7 principles that they came up of how to teach or or the art of teaching. And one is what I mentioned here, the conviction of your primal purpose, knowing who you are. The second, it is seeking knowledge for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then knowing why you're seeking knowledge. So it's not knowledge, seeking it for itself, it's not the end. Just having knowledge is not the end. It's to know why you're doing that. And that is to help with refinement of your character. All right? So that's the number 2, seeking knowledge for its benefits and knowing why you're seeking it. And then the third one is my favorite, is that the learning environment is sacred, it is disciplined, and it is structured. And sacred doesn't really mean, so there's 7 of them, but I can only remember 3 off my head. Sacred meaning that it's not a musalla, it's not a salah place, but it's a place that where they can come and be themselves and ask questions. Because even in the Qur'an, it says that there's no compulsion in faith. Why is that? It's a very interesting thing that because for you to believe, just like Prophet Ibrahim, you have to question. And the more you question, the more you become convinced of your beliefs. And so as in Islamic schools and even at home sometimes as parents, we shy away from the tough questions that our children have, especially in today's society. We don't want to talk about, oh, it's just because I said that. And I know you probably heard that, but that doesn't help the child to develop their worldviews. And so going back to that, critical thinking, everybody throws around that word, critical thinking, that we have to teach our children critical thinking. How? You don't pick up a book and read it. It's through your instructional approaches. And so it's sacred, it's disciplined, and it allows for investigation. And it's structured. So those are the 3, but there's several others, like it evokes a sense of awe and wonder. That's the 7th principle. That's my favorite one. Yes. Yeah, so that's, and there's 3, inshallah, perhaps we can talk about those pedagogical principles and how we can implement them.
Assalamu alaikum. Really enjoyed your lecture. Thank you. Jazakallah. So you mentioned an environment of having at home from the instructional point of view, and how sometimes parents can shy away from answering some of those tough questions that our children bring. Do you recommend any resources, any books, any podcasts, considering today's society, but also obviously keeping Islam in mind for parents, for Muslim teachers, that they can refer to kind of answer our children's questions, other than obviously being knowledgeable and doing your own research and learning about Islam yourself?
Yeah.
Do you have any recommendations on that?
I guess I would start out by asking the age of the child that how old are you're thinking?
So I'm specifically talking about younger children, so
elementary,
4 and up. But I know age 4.
Oh.
Age 4 and up, because I also believe this kind of starts young. When you say the more questions they ask, the more it clears it for them, or it makes your belief stronger. But as you get older, the more questions you have, it can also confuse you. So finding a balance between that, would be something that I would want to look into more.
So that's another, I guess, principle that you hit on there, is to knowing when a question that your child have will actually harm them because they're not developmentally ready for it. And being developmentally ready for things is really important as well. because children go through stages of development, right? So how you answer a particular question, it depends, one, I guess, what that question is, and if you can leave it for at the moment and then answer it at a more appropriate time. So when between the ages 3 and 4 and 5, I would consider, like, if they have questions, you keep it pretty brief. You don't need to get into ideologies and philosophies of things. You just say, well, such and such, and just explain it in a matter-of-fact way. And then that's it. Because you don't want to not answer the question, right? As they get older, between, say, and Ali radiallahu anha, mashallah, Sayyidina Ali had a beautiful way of how to teach children. Actually, he has the best pedagogical principles, which is to play and nurture them at 7. Then you educate them between 7 and 14. What does education mean? And that is where you inculcate adab within them. So even when they're asking questions, they have to know certain questions. You can wait a little bit because they need the background knowledge to even fully understand the answer to that question. So there's also some patience in there. And then the last stage is to the years of between 14 or when they become baligh, is the years of guidance, because they're completely responsible now. So you can't make them do anything at that point. You can advise them, because hopefully, inshallah, you've done the work in the lower grades, right? So in terms of resources, it all depends on what's the question and how old they are, because then you have to look at that, because you never want to handicap a child either and give them baggage, as they would say, to unpack what you said. Yeah. I hope that was it. Maybe we can.
It was. Okay. It was. Jazakallah.
Assalamu alaikum. My question for you is, what would be your recommendation for children who are just entering more into Islam as they enter their preteen stage? What would be the best approach? Because of course we don't want if they've been in the mainstream, I'll just call it for the lack of words, for most of their lives, and trying to veer them onto the right path in Islam, and as they're entering their preteen years, where we don't want it to be where we're forcing and it becomes a tug of war or anything like that. What would be your best opinion in approaching that path for them, and to kind of veering them onto that direction?
The first thing that comes to mind is to make it easy. This deen is easy, to make things easy for them. So for instance, I'm assuming that the first thing that they will have to learn is how to pray salah, is to establishing their 5 prayers. So one of my teachers actually mentioned that when you have older teenagers or children who haven't learned how to pray by the time they're mature, like 12, 13, 14, you start them off. If they're coming completely as a new Muslim, or they haven't done any prayers in their entire life, you start them off with Jummah prayers. For 40 days, just establish. You're going to take on this because you want to teach them, the whole point of having belief is taking responsibility for yourself. And that's kind of what society pushes you away from, is that you're not responsible for anything. You can do as you want and do what you want to do. But so what you want to do is to honor their word to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that first thing, it becomes your salah. So the thing that you would do is to not preach, not to just be human with them, because this is a journey again. This is a lifelong journey. So the first thing with salah is that let them say that they're making a promise. They're actually taking a covenant with Allah that I want to pray, and my process is this, that I will start with Salatul Jummah, and every Friday, without missing a beat, they're going to establish that prayer, right? Then once they've done that, then they can now take on whatever of the 5 prayers that they do. Most people choose Salatul Maghrib just because it's a perfect reflection time. You're going to take that on for 40 days. You can choose other prayers. You are welcome to do that, but you cannot miss Maghrib. Those other prayers are Mubarak, alhamdulillah, but you can't. Once you've established that habit, if you need more than 40 days, you take another salah on, and you continue like that. And over several months, boom, you're praying all your 5 salahs. And salah, it says, hayya ala falah, come to success. From salah, everything else opens for you. The world opens for you. Inshallah. So I would say focus on the salah, inshallah, if that's not a habit as well. And just be easy. Just take it easy. Don't, you know, don't push them, as you say. Because you want to find the beauty in Islam, and Islam is really beautiful.
Assalamu alaikum. So Jazakallah khairan for the awesome session, and I just want to comment the part how you said education is connecting with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, like Tawheed, and head and the heart should align with whatever we are doing. So among the youth and among the adults also, I can see that we have like two different worlds. It's not connecting. We have an entire different world in social media. At home we are different. When we are praying, it's different. But it's not aligned. That's how I feel among the youth also. I mean, at home they are like very confident. They're coming to pray and everything, but outside it's a totally different world.
Yeah.
So how do we, always connect the head and heart together, and how do we, advise our kids in that situation?
It is tough, because at that point, if they're teenagers and they're older, they've kind of formed themselves and what they believe, and they're headstrong about it too. So if you come in trying to butt heads with them, you're not going to get anywhere. So it's with teenagers, again, it's being very diplomatic with them, and commenting on the good things that they do, encouraging them, giving them encouraging words, and don't chastise them and stuff. Of course, if they're doing something completely haram, that is completely, then you need to have serious conversations with them. But it comes back to taking responsibility for themselves. They have to know that in the end, that it is between them and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So whether you are there or not, or who is in front of them, they have to know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they are completely responsible to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But that comes back again with that knowledge connecting with the heart. So that's where I'm going to kind of bring it back to, is that they have to take responsibilities for their actions. So with social media and things like that, being a parent, I don't have my children engaged or online with social media. I would limit that, especially in the nighttime. They should not have, as a house rule. And I'm quite frank, and it might come really as a shock to the system for my kids and stuff. But I said, I am the mom and dad is dad, and our house rules are this. You don't like them? Bismillah.
That's the hardest part, just to letting.
But that's because you're afraid, and you're afraid of losing the respect of your child or the love. But actually, children need boundaries, and they need the adults around them to help them set those boundaries. You have to help them help themselves. They are adults in training wheels, in a sense. I'm being very strong about this, but when it comes, especially with teenagers, teenage years are very important. Because if you sort of stumble here, their 20s, they're going to have a hard time in their 20s. They're going to be unpacking a lot of things. So you have to help protect them, preserve their fitrah. And that's your job as a parent. And as and whatever way. It's sort of like, again, my teacher would say point blank to me that you want to be kind and allow them to sleep through Fajr, but they're disobeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? So it's that same sort of thing. And then they will be accountable for it on Yawm al-Qiyamah, unless they repent and make it up. But you are trying to be kind, but you're not saving them in the end. Right? So you have to protect your family as much as you can, especially your children. That's the amana that has been given. And as a mother, it's a very tough job. That's why Jannah is our feet. It's we're the glue of the house, and we have to, and we're the rahmah too. But I would suggest not to talk to them human to human and say that I'm not doing this to punish you. This is for your benefit. And they'll come around. They will throw a tantrum, and they will kick and scream, but in the end they'll settle and they'll come around. Inshallah. Oh yes.
I had a question too. There's people saying that teenagers. You have a teenager, 16-year-old, right? Yeah. And I'm hearing mixed messages. One is saying that scientific studies are showing that teenagers need extra sleep, so they have to wake up at, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, or 9 o'clock. But in our teachings in Islam, we're told to wake up for Fajr, right? So how do you differentiate that? Because it's making the teenagers and the parents thinking that their kids can sleep in all day, because they need that 10 hours or 12 hours of sleep. But in our religion, we're told we have to wake up for Fajr. So it's kind of exactly the opposite. So how do you explain that?
Well, I think when it comes to sleep, yes, teenagers do sleep a lot, but it's the training ground, right? And this is where our deen is about discipline. It is about withholding. It's, remember, why do you have an intellect? It is to withhold you from doing the stupid. So if you're always just letting your nafs take you over and sleep, the adhan is so beautiful, right? Even the Fajr adhan is come to prayer is better than sleep. Prayer is better than sleep. Why do we have those words? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows as human beings, our nature, that the sweetness in sleep is so sweet, but the prayer is better, right? Because and when you get that two sunnahs for Fajr, and this is the way you need to talk to your children, is so that you root them back into what Allah knows you. He's closer to you than your jugular veins. He's telling you in the adhan itself. Sorry, I feel like I'm lecturing.
Yeah, it's good.
Okay, yeah. So this is the way I talk to my children, and I always say, I understand that you want to sleep, but that also means in the nighttime, you're making sure your nighttime activities does not, if you choose to stay up late, you're waking up for Fajr. It's a sense of discipline, right? It's about honoring your word with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. So it is about disciplining. And yes, they need sleep. They can wake up and go back to sleep.
I'm just going to go back to what one of the sisters asked about the teenagers. So the favorite quote by Hazrat Ali, that has been my favorite.
Yes.
And I have gone through that phase of handling the teenagers. So I hold that dear to me. And what I do is that after 14 years of the teenagers, I just become
their friend, yes.
So that's what Hazrat Ali said, that you become your friend, you hang out with them, whatever they're doing. So once you're hanging out with them, obviously they will try to do what pleases you. So then the foundation is laid down right in the beginning years.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely, because at that age, they want guidance, right? And that's why it's called the age of guidance. And they need it from their parents who have their best interests. But you have to allow them to also make mistakes. Of course, the ones that are not detrimental to them, and then they learn from it too. But yes, being their friend at that age and not being harsh, and you can't be authoritative with them at that time. That time has passed.
Yeah.
Right? That was for earlier years. Now you can give them a good word and they have to be allowed to taste it, digest it, and then inshallah they will believe it, and then inshallah that will give them the ability to act.
Actually, this procedure helps in the 20s, like you mentioned. If this is not done at this time, the 20s are terrible.
Yeah.
They're just like terrible twos, those are terrible twos.
I haven't reached there.
So this part, the being the friend with them, that carries them through the 20s.
Yeah. Being a parent is a 20-year investment. Then you'll see your returns. Inshallah. Inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum. So my husband and I, we have a clear plan of how we want our kids to be raised and what we're trying to do. And of course, family in our cultures is the most important thing. Aunts, uncles, cousins, and stuff. And their plan is obviously completely different from our plans, right? And their cousins are like their best friends, and they grew up with them. And of course, we all love each other, but it doesn't, how do I say this? Not in a mean way, but we're trying to teach to eat halal, but cousins don't eat halal, right? And I don't want to make them feel like, oh, their cousin is bad or their cousin is wrong, or we need to disconnect from them completely, right? And I'm trying not to do that. But they ask me okay, well, we eat halal and they don't, or we pray and they don't, so why don't they do it, So I don't want to say your cousins are wrong or they're bad, or of course not, to each their own. But how do I go without I don't know how to say it. Like, how do I go?
How
Like,
to-
try to not to think that their cousins are bad people. Obviously, they're not to each their own. But like, that's been our struggle in a way too.
That's a
And I don't want to disconnect from family. Obviously, we love cousins and brothers and sisters and everybody. So that was the main thing.
I think I wouldn't even think of it as like family, because family is so like everything is relative except relatives, right? So subhanallah, this is a tough one, because especially if your sohbah is with them all the time, but that just means you have to bolster up your children, inshallah. And it's really important what you said, is not to make your children feel superior than your cousins, because that's also a nafs thing, that ego to come about, right? So it's really important to say, it's okay, they inshallah make dua, and then perhaps through your example, they will come to eat halal. But bolster your child into why they're eating halal and why it's a benefit for you. There is so many, like, sometimes we focus on the small amount of haram things, but everything else is halal for us. So change the perspective of it, that it's a benefit for them, and that this is why that they're doing it, so that they don't feel themselves bad, nor are they judging others for not doing it. Because you never know, they might be the cause of why their cousins come to eat halal and appreciate it. But let them be the example. But it means that they also have to be very strong, and you have to be very strong, and you have to be very open and say, yeah, that's a good question, you know?
Because they ask questions when they do, you know, like, because they're Muslim too. I was like, of course they're Muslim, everybody's Muslim. But
Yeah.
I don't know how to explain.
Well, then you just have to say that when it comes to that, we're all Muslims, yes, but everybody is on the journey and different. They're on the same road, but there are different parts of that journey. So everybody's working on themselves, right? Alhamdulillah, that's not your jihad, right? But we have our own jihad, right? Just say Alhamdulillah, that's not yours. So Bismillah. But don't focus on I guess, in a bigger, broader sense, don't focus on the creation. You have to always focus on what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from you. And that's the whole point of educating our children, is to go back to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from us. What was Allah want? And that comes with the head and the heart coming together. And answer all of their questions. And if you don't know, ask people, say, let's look it up together, you know? But don't shy away from the conversation whenever they bring it up. And just keep talking to them, because they might say, I don't know, I'm okay, I can go either way or that way. But in the end, something will click in them. If you hold, you know, inshallah. Make lots of dua. Dua of a mom and a parent is make lots of dua for them, to Allah protect them and preserve their hearts. Inshallah. Yeah.
One of the, kind of going off of what she was just talking about, one of the things that I've actually had this question asked to me by my child, and you know, my answer to her, whether it was correct or not, seemed to get the message across. And I wanted your opinion about it. When I tell you, no, this is your journey with Allah. This is your path.
Exactly.
Everybody has their own path, and it's yours to take, and it's between you and him, and you and her, you and him alone. Her path
Is hers.
Will be hers. And I use that when it comes to really anything in life.
Yep.
You know, there's so many different facets, and it seemed to have helped, and to let them know, like, this is your journey and that's theirs, and they'll have their own challenges in life when their time comes.
Yeah, I think that's the best way. It's for them to take responsibility for themselves and their relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because they are responsible for their relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if others are, it's like, okay, it's the old adage, right? If your friends jump off the cliff, are you going to jump off the cliff
Correct.
too? Unless they can help you out. You know, and it's in cliff diving, right? But it's true. You have your own intellect, and you have to make your own decisions in life. And you can't always, you take counsel, of course, and you look to others, but in the end of the day, your decision is your own, right?
And casting that judgment on other people, you know, is also not the greatest thing. It's like, you don't judge, you don't know what they're
Absolutely.
dealing with, what their daily life is, and so forth. So it also gives like a learning opportunity to be able to help guide them through that, and hopefully they can hold on to that. And walking the path that they have when they interact with other people, especially non-Muslims. We have a lot of non-Muslim friends in our group, and it gives, I have a lot of, in my path, I need to get closer to Allah, and inshallah that, you know, will happen more and more, but I'm also grateful for the opportunity that I do have when I have the non-Muslim friends in our lives and on our path. It gives us an opportunity to show them and celebrate with them and respect them and teach my children respect goes both ways.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's really remarkable because they do come to admire the especially whenever someone sees children who are behaved well, or they interact well with others, even though they disagreed with you earlier in your life and they put a lot of barriers in front of you. They come to appreciate, like, when they're ill, that you make it a priority to visit them, because that's part of the sunnah, that you go and you visit people who are sick, right? Or you attend a wedding, or you hold all these obligations in the highest of maqams, right? Because it is from Islam. And so they honor that and they value that, because in today's society, I don't feel like going, so I don't need to go, right? So you can easily dismiss a commitment. And we want to bring that back to our children, that you have to honor your commitments and know what those commitments are, right? So you don't just dismiss things. Right? So yes, don't cast judgments on people because you don't know. Make 70 excuses, right? And it's not our jihad, alhamdulillah, but we have our own, right?